the intent of.
I just need to do that real quick. Go ahead.
No problem. Today we're looking at the differences between the 21 and the 24 International Energy Code. And thanks, Kevin, for being here. As we get into this, Kevin has been kind of staying up to date as we put in the agenda. The 2024 code has not been published yet, but Kevin is up on all of the changes. And so I'm going to give him a few minutes when we get to a particular slide. And then Kevin, if you would kind of keep an eye on the rest of the presentation as we go through it. And if something has been modified or changed, please let us know. As always, everything that we present will be made available. And so as soon as the meeting is over today, Lance will send a copy of this PowerPoint out. And also we have some more resources that I sent over that we'll be adding to the website. And if there isn't any questions, we'll go ahead and get into today's presentation.
Hey, Jerry, do you mind real quick? We had two people that just jumped on right after we finished up. Do you want to introduce them real quick?
Go ahead.
Charlie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? I think this is your first time being able to join us this year.
Yeah, hold on, Charlie Allen, City of Ammon building official, been part of the Code Collaborative for many years. Good to be here.
Thanks for being here. And then Lindsay Love.
Hi, I'm not going to show my video because I'm eating lunch right now, but I'm Lindsay Love and I'm with IECC Idaho.
Thanks for sharing your lunchtime with us, Lindsay. I know that's a big sacrifice.
Thanks.
And Lindsay, this is Jerry Peterson. After the meeting or when it's convenient, give me a call so we can talk about Earth Week coming up here shortly.
Okay, thanks.
So the first slide on do you have the slide deck pulled up, Lance? The PowerPoint?
Give me just a second. I'll get that.
And meanwhile, this is Dawn. We just had someone join us in person here in the office. We just did introductions. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes. Is it on already?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, my name is Facundo Martinez. I'm with the Integrated Design Lab. Yeah, Damon couldn't make it in person, so he asked me to join in.
Oh, great. Welcome.
Okay, Jerry, I'm getting the slide pulled up right now. And
so go to the second slide. And the next, there we go. Thank you. So this is a part of one of the other PowerPoints that we're providing online. But I thought we would start with this one. If you look over on the bottom row towards the 2020, you'll see where we're at currently. We are on the 2018 International Code. I'll talk about some of the amendments, but if you look across the slide, you can see the different codes when they were enacted. And remember that we started here in Idaho, we started our energy code program in 2010. Statewide, there was obviously, we've been actually on one of the leaders in energy efficiency for many, many decades, thanks to a great group of people that came before me. Charlie's been involved with this for a long, long time. But 2009 was the first time, or 2010, excuse me, was the first time we went statewide with the energy code. And that was with an executive order from Butch, with Butch Otter. And it was tied to the ARA funds, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And in order for the state to receive funds, which was tens of millions of dollars, there was an agreement that we would adopt the 2009 Energy Code and show a 90% compliance rate within 5 years. And those targets were met. We had some jurisdictions in the state that adopted the 12 and the 15, but we were not able to move it statewide until January of 2022 when the 2018 went into effect. So if you look up from about the 2020 up on the chart, you'll see that, you know, where the changes are going to be with the 2021 and 2024. The other thing I wanted to point out on this, and we'll have some opportunity to talk about it, was that there was a lot of interest and push to try to achieve, you know, net zero or close to it by 2030. And if you look at the red line, you can see that, you know, something very, very significant would have to happen in order to meet that target. So we're currently at about 60%. With the both the 21 and the 24, those are about 9% to 10% improvements. That would take us to 40, but then we'd have to deal with another 40% to get us to net zero. Next slide, please. So in Idaho, there really are two things that have an impact. The biggest thing is the air sealing, and then also we have R38 in Climate Zone 5. This isn't a huge thing, but there is some potential there. The air sealing is a big thing. We tried putting mandatory blower door testing into the code through our IDAPA rules. We were only testing 20% of homes at a 5 air change per hour maximum limit. There was a lot of issue with enforcement and continuity and finding people to do it and stuff. And so this was changed. This is part of the change that is in front of the legislature right now. And Lance, when we finish this slide, I don't have the agenda in front of me. I'm gonna stop for a minute and have you do a recap on where we're at with our amendments in the legislature. So the air sealing requirement in 2018 was actually 3 air changes per hour. And the only thing that we have for reference right now is the 2018 field studies that David Freelove was involved around the state of Idaho, and we were at a 4.2 average at the time of that study. And so until we have a way to update that data, we are slightly better than our 5 air changes, but I don't know that we are 3 air changes on average. And so there are a couple of things that, you know, even with our existing code, that's probably where we would see the most significant improvement, you know, without changing anything, would be, you know, trying to figure out how to address these air change and blower door testing. So with that, I'm going to stop for a minute and let Lance bring us up to date on where we're at with the rule changes.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I'm just gonna actually make sure here, we did just get a quick chat comment. And this is from Jerica. I don't know if everyone can see that, but it's PNNL's Building Energy Codes program provides state level analysis that shows the impact of the amendments. It's included with the residential map, but that's there in the comments. I don't know if you see it as well, Jerry. It should be on your side too. If you look at the chat on your screen. But thanks for sharing that, Jerica. Is there anything that you wanted to comment on with what you just shared, or was that just something you wanted to make sure we all had access to?
No, I think that Jerry was starting to allude to this when he was looking at the changes in efficiency over time, that the impact of state amendments can really change how the state is actually performing with efficiency. And so when we consider these amendments, we're actually more in line with the 2009 IECC than the 2018 or even the two versions that preceded that.
Okay, well, thanks so much for sharing that. And then just going back to Jerry, what you're talking about, the amendments, as far as my understanding is that it has been approved, it has moved through both houses. So there shouldn't be any issues as far as for us to have to be concerned about with additional changes. They were looking at a couple of things with the sprinklers and fourplexes. I haven't heard any updates on that one. And then the other one that I did email you guys about was in regards to it was House Bill 662. It was changed to 710. It was about electrical code, whether or not the city of Boise could continue to require to install electrical charging stations in residential areas. And basically some back and forth that we learned from going over with the legislature is that that was already written in code. It was or in the rules, and that there was some concern that there was a state agency that wasn't going to follow through with those rules. And so they're now adding it to the code to further reinforce the fact that no city can preempt state rules when it comes to putting in charging stations. So that was the biggest item that I noticed that might be of somewhat concern to us. Considering it wasn't the rules, I don't know how much we really have that we can look at with the fact that it was already in there. But that's the update on that. So the amendments are done. Let's back up where we were and then go back to the comments. And but yeah, that was it for as far as for the legislature, and I'll continue to keep you guys updated. We got a couple of weeks left. Sounds like we'll go through the end of this week and then maybe into next week for the legislative session. Doesn't sound like there's going to be anything in particular that we should be concerned about as a group. But you never know. We get curveballs all the time on things, so we'll see what happens.
And then I had a couple of questions on effective dates, and typically on rule changes, unless there's a specified date, which I'm not aware of, they go into effect when the legislature wraps up. So those will be changing here shortly. Lance, looks like there were a couple of comments that come in if you want to address that.
It looks like it's talking about that just back to the graphic or the residential map that Jerica shared. Charlie, is there anything else that you would like to add to the comments that you posted in there, or was that just adding more contact with the climate zones?
No, I think it's good. I didn't realize Jerica's statement that this is in comparison to the 90.1 standard makes more sense now that I read that.
No,
Right.
just with the commercial, because of the ARA funding that Jerry talked about, all of the comparisons that PNNL has done up until the 2021 has been to standard 90.1. But they look at the IECC now, and they will moving forward. But the commercial comparison is to standard 90.1 rather than the commercial provisions of the IECC.
Yeah. And I guess I would just say where we haven't amended the installation values as much in climate zone 6, I would hope that we would reflect more towards the 18. I'm not sure, but I know I know the testing would take us down a couple of notches since we don't require the air, air heat loss or air testing, lower door testing.
Good point.
So Lance, if we could flash back to that chart just for a second, just to kind of remind everybody where we're at on that. This one here. And now go ahead and advance to the two more forward. So one of the analogies that we've used with the collaborative and trying to address the code changes, I used to tell people, when it comes to code adoption, we've all shoveled snow, and everybody instinctively knows that you don't wait for it to get 2 feet deep before you start trying to get it out of the way. You kind of, get rid of it as it comes, and it's easier to push, than it is to just wade in there and try and do it. And so, this is the downside of, pushing the code down the road is, we didn't have huge changes between the 9 and the 12, and there were very little changes between the 12 and the 15. But then there was a significant, compared to the 9 and the 18, and we're seeing an even bigger change in the 21, followed by another big change in 24. And so, if we don't address either of those, or we're not willing to look at either of those, we are in fact digging ourselves into a pretty deep hole. Next slide. So I'm not, as part of my role or what I agreed to do was just to help facilitate these meetings and promote the discussion on it. But I know from previous, meetings and discussions with different leaders and stuff around the state, one of the problems with what we did last year in capping the codes, putting basically a minimum maximum language in the law that says that a city or jurisdiction can't require a more stricter version of the code, is we've kind of put the cities under a burden, because I know that there's association of mayors. I know that they're city leaders set targets, national targets and stuff, and this can and will impact that, where they're not able to look at a time frame or a target. And we have areas of the country that want to go to net zero, and they have a specified timeline. And I shouldn't say I didn't do it, but currently as it's written, we've definitely made that process much more difficult. And so this may be something that we have to come back and address, and probably should. At the same time, we have to realize that some of the companies that want to move here are concerned about climate change and carbon footprint, and they're looking for places to do business, but we can't expect them to change their company mindset when it comes to things like that. And so we have to weigh those possibilities. The other thing that happens is when we get into areas of the state where we have competitive housing. North Idaho is a good example, where you have major cities on each side of the border. Do we potentially risk competition from neighboring states when it comes to policies? Having said all of that, this doesn't prevent anybody from designing or building better than code, but we don't have the ability to mandate it, which sometimes can be what the push that we need to get things rolling. At the same time, one of the common complaints I hear from the home builder industry is they don't have a way to recover that upfront cost. And sometimes we wonder, when we're developing training and stuff, can we or should we help with that marketing campaign? How do we help home builders market their product to a better audience, or do we even have a role in that? And so we are at that point in our code review process where we need to start, or I would suggest we start looking at topics, versus specifics. Are there ways to, address specific things, not only in this meeting, but as this is working through the board. So I will kind of stop there for now. We'll bring this topic back up at towards the end of it when we look at next steps, but I just wanted to kind of get that conversation going. And I apologize, my printer is updating or something. Should be done here in a second. Next slide, please. So a couple of things, and I wanted to bring this out in case it comes up in other discussions. There were some changes in the code development process this last go around. I'm pretty sure, Kevin, you might address this if you want. I'm pretty sure that because of COVID and stuff, they had to change the way the code development works, where we typically would, gather in pretty large numbers at a central location and go through that. We weren't able to do that with the 2024, and so they did it through more like a standard, developing a standard. And so this is just some information on how those members were broke out. Again, this is something for people to review. I don't find fault with that. I just want to make sure that people understand that if it does come up in conversation, that they did go through a different process this last go around. Next slide.
Hey, Jerry, they will continue, we will at ICC continue to develop it under the standards development process.
Okay. So moving forward, this is how it will be done.
Yeah.
Okay. Was this in response to COVID and the travel restrictions, or is this just a better way of doing it?
Yeah, it was more so in response to some of the appeals that happened in the 2021 code, and to make sure that we had representatives from across the industry in each of those. On your previous slide, you had a breakdown of the different categories that people belong to. There was an effort to make sure that not one group had more than a third of representation and things like that, just trying to make sure that it was developed in a more industry-wide way.
Okay. And Jerica, thank you for providing this PowerPoint that I borrowed some of these slides from. That full PowerPoint will be available on the web, and so if anybody wants to access that for more information. In the interest of time, I was just trying to hit some of the highlights. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Back up one. So there were about 200 proposals received, and there's kind of or reviewed, I should say. And there is some additional information on the breakdown and kind of how the votes went and stuff. But for anybody that's not familiar with the code development process, it's in depth and it's a lot of information. And so when we look at the down towards the bottom where it talks about the second public comment draft, that information is part of what I've asked Lance to put on our website. And so anybody that's interested in the individual things that were proposed, the individual proposals, or who initiated it, who sponsored it, that information is available. And so those two documents will be on our website after the meeting. Next slide. And this is the the kind of the one-page short version of the major changes. This was recently amended, and Kevin Rose has been following this and provided this particular graph, and I'm going to turn it over to him for a few minutes and let him speak to this particular document. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. And hi, everyone. My name again is Kevin Rose. I work with Blake at NIA. So it's been a few years since I've been attending one of these get-togethers, so I wanted to quickly reintroduce myself. I've been NIA's lead following the 2024 IECC development. In fact, I was on some of the voting committees and informational subcommittees that contributed to the development of the code. We even put in some of the code change proposals ourselves as proponents or co-proponents at NIA. So I've been pretty involved since back in 2021 when this process got started, and there's been a lot. So what I've aspired to do in this one table here is to summarize that 2.5 years of process into what matters for Idaho, what is relevant to climate zones 5 and 6. And I'm using an energy lens here. So the cost, building cost is probably a lot of the same proposals if you look at what are the most impactful changes in terms of cost, but I just wanted to highlight that I'm using an energy lens and identifying these as the most significant changes. I have organized these by code section and by the way that I've ordered them also by the 3 main code compliance pathways that are available in both the 2021 IECC and the 2024 IECC, the prescriptive code path, the performance path, and the energy rating index or ERI path. So as you can see, I broke out what the requirement is, where there's a difference between 2021 and 2024. And I've listed those in the columns, and on the right, you can at a glance see if it's an energy efficiency increase or decrease between the 2021 and 2024. You'll notice that it's not all green. It's not all an efficiency improvement. This is in part because of what Jerry laid out and Jerica provided a little extra explanation on. It was a different procedure that was used, a more of a consensus based process, which did open the door for some more give and take negotiation across proposals, across the multiple steps of the process. So it wasn't just layering efficiency on what we already had. There was some effort to look at the cohesive code across all the sections and make sure that all the parts were working together and striving for the best balance of energy efficiency and cost that we could make across the whole code. Now, in terms of the outcome of the code, which literally was just finalized last week and is not available yet, there are a lot of folks who are not pleased with the outcome. I'm not going to get into the final days of the code and all of that process, but this is in this table a summary of the major changes. And while I've been prattling on here, maybe your eyes have had a chance to glance over the words and you've been able to take a look at what the different changes were. I'll highlight what the 2 big changes were that drove energy efficiency savings for new homes, or hopefully will drive energy savings for new homes in Idaho in the future. The first is, and probably the biggest individual saver across the country, including Idaho, is in section R408, the additional efficiency packages. So the 2021 IECC introduced that section. It's not something that we currently have in the Idaho code. And in 2021, it's a pretty simple system. You get 5 choices and you have to pick one of them. And those choices range from HVAC options to envelope efficiency. The 2024 IECC really soups that up. It's similar to what happens on the commercial side for folks who use that code and are familiar with section C406. But the list of options has been greatly expanded. And in concert, more is being asked for projects through use of that section. So yeah, there's increase in efficiency there, but lots of options being made available. So there's a lot of flexibility for figuring out how to achieve those savings. That's a proposal that efficiency advocates and builders rallied the most around together in terms of how to move efficiency forward, with industry really appreciating the flexibility that it provides. So that was one of the bigger savers that I wanted to mention. I said I'd mention two. The other one is kind of a combination of two, and it's most applicable to climate zone 6. That's the provision to require an HRV or an ERV as the mechanical ventilation. And that partners with the air leakage reduction in that climate zone, which is down just a half an ACH 50. That those two measures help lock in savings when done in concert. In addition to, on their own, but they do work together as well. So those are what I would characterize as the two big moves forward in Idaho as far as efficiency. So maybe I'll take a breath now and see if anybody's got any questions, or Jerry, I don't know if you've got a plan of where to go from here.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I broke these down a little bit more in the detail, and I'm going to go through those briefly, and then I do have a section for comments. And so if we can kind of touch on these specifically, and then open it up for comments after that. The reason this slide is important is that, if we do start moving towards, adopting the 2021, we don't want to adopt something more restrictive that's going to be rolled back in the following code section. And so this was one of the motivations for doing this comparison, was to see, if anything changes. And specifically, if we look at the top line, the R60 ceiling insulation was changed back to R49. And then the bottom line on the ERI, where it went from 52 and 51 back to 54 and 53. And so we just want to be aware that, those are things that, if we decide to move with the adoption of the 21, we may want to amend that to reflect the 24. Again, just throwing this out there. Next slide, please. Next slide. So again, I don't want to spend a bunch of time on these. I will stop for comment. As he mentioned, there are changes in climate zone 6 from 3 air changes per hour to 2.5. Also in that same slide there's now a sampling protocol for multifamily units that wasn't there before. Next slide. This one is, in my opinion, kind of overdue, where we've been using standard type thermostats with heat pumps, and they've recognized that we needed, a different type of controller on there. And so there is now language that specifies exactly what that looks like. And this would be applicable to all supplemental heat. Next slide. And quite a bit of language changes in ducts. The 21 addresses some of the language for doing ducts inside conditioned space, that's, in my opinion, is overdue. There's huge potential there for savings. And so I'm glad they're looking at language. What is new in the 24 that we didn't talk about was there's now duct sizing requirements that, and this is beneficial, that actually refers back to the IRC and the IMC, and this is another one of those things I think is a weakness, where we're trying to do things in the energy code that maybe should be in the other codes. And so next slide. Kevin mentioned the HRV, ERV requirement into climate zone 6. Next slide. And if you look down towards the bottom on this one, the last requirement, they are setting a maximum kilowatt for electric resistant heaters, unless you use at least one heat pump. So this is new language. And I'm sure everybody's heard the big thing that was out on social media where they were talking about prohibitions on different fuels and stuff, and that is not part of the code. There is another change here. Next slide. And I'm not, I know what is happening here in the Treasure Valley. Charlie, you may want to comment on this if you want when we get to that comment section, but there has been a lot of discussion about whether, we should be providing single source fuels. And this is one of them that says if you're going to put in a range or a clothes dryer or any other appliance besides the furnace, you have to provide both gas and electric. And so this is where we get into that split fuel thing. Next slide.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, we got a comment from Kevin, I think, Jerry.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, just on that last slide, on that last point about electric readiness, one point about the 2024 IECC process that I glossed over is that there was, and Jerica has beat me to the punch and put it in the comments,
Okay.
that was actually removed along with a couple of other related provisions from the code. So while that does not exclude this group in Idaho from considering these sorts of approaches, you will not see them in the body of the 2024 IECC per the IECC Board of Directors decision on appealed proposals.
Okay. Lance and I will make a note and we'll just remove this slide before it gets sent out.
And then Jerica, by the way, Jerry just linked the full Board of Directors decision regarding that. So
Thank you.
And Jerry, you might have to remove a couple other things that are in this slide deck.
Yeah,
I would
please
assume.
let Lance and I both know before we send the PowerPoint out.
Sure.
Next slide.
all right, 1 second. There we go.
The 2021 did provide for solar ready zones, and this was just a clarification that neither that there is no mandate requiring solar or energy storage. Those are in appendixes, and I'll list those appendixes here shortly. Next slide. This was also in the 2021 and again in the 24, requiring EV ready. And so this is one of the things that Lance brought up with the legislature. I would put this under one of the hot topics, and I have a short list of those we're going to review towards the end of the presentation. So I'm going to come back to that, but I just want everybody to know where the requirement is. Next slide.
Hey, Jerry, sorry to interrupt. Those
Go ahead.
last couple of changes are all ones that were appealed. So the
Okay.
EV ready, the solar readiness, and the electric readiness, those will all appear as appendices that you can adopt, you know, if your jurisdiction wants to, but those were the main sections that were appealed by our board of directors.
And so, Jerica, help me understand, some of this was required in the 2021, but was taken out in the 24?
No, none of those were required in the 2021 code.
Okay.
They were approved through the consensus committee. So the vast majority of the people that participated in the consensus committee approved those to be in the 2024 code. And then we had an appeals process that allowed interested parties to make a case for the appeals, and then the board of directors made a final decision. So some of these that were voted on by the consensus committee have been moved to appendices based on the board of directors decision.
Thank you. Lance, probably just delete this slide too. And we'll compare notes before we send this out.
Okay, I'm just making a note of the name of the slide, so I just make it to it, but yeah. Are we ready
Thank
to
you.
move to the next slide, Jerry?
Next slide.
Thanks for all these notes, Jerica. I really appreciate it.
Couple of things on this one that I wanted to point out was that we are now allowing credits for duct location. Again, this has been this has a significant potential for savings. We've done quite a bit of modeling on, you know, ducts in attics and ducts in conditioned space, buried ducts, all of that. And I'm glad that they are, you know, now providing us credit for those locations, because it is something that can be significant. Also, about mid-page is there is a specific requirement for homes larger than 5,000 square feet. And so this is the first time we've seen language in there related to size of home. Next slide. And these are the additional efficiency requirements that Kevin touched on. These are the 11 categories, and it allows you to pick 45 measures within those categories to kind of total up your 10 or more points. And so lots of options there. Next slide. And these are the appendices that Jerica mentioned. There are 6 new ones, and then an update on the net zero appendix. And so there's, you know, we actually have something, you know, in writing, in language, if we choose to use some of that. We now have the reference for these. Again, we're still waiting on the 2024 publication, but then we'll have access to this language. Next slide.
And Jerry, you'll have to make one correction on this. That all electric residential buildings appendix will be a resource rather than an adoptable appendix in this code cycle.
Okay, should we just delete that line?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, all of the numbering and things like that may change a little bit anyway before final publication.
Okay.
But that one for sure. It'll still show up in code text as a resource, but it will not be an adoptable. It won't be a mandatory adoptable language, to my understanding.
Thank you. And Lance, you had noted that. We'll just remove that line.
And that resource the board of directors decision that I shared in the chat, that pretty much outlines everything that you'll have to just remove from this presentation, Jerry. It should be super easy.
Okay, can we share that with the group?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, and if you want me to email it to you, I can.
Would you email it to Lance and I? We'll share that with the group or make sure it's available on the web.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the board, this is Charlie, the board decided, the ICC, board decided to use preemption. They felt like there were federal codes that would preempt the Energy Policy and Conservation Act that would affect those, and so they preempted 3 items, and that was one of them, all electric. But like Jerick said, it's a resource. The other 2 were the glide path to net zero, and then an appendix glide path. Cautionary notes or something like that for minimum efficiency standards.
Thanks, Charlie.
And just so I have it right, Jerry, which appendix item are we removing?
RE.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure I had that correct.
It is about, go ahead, next slide. It's about 10 to 2. We have probably 20 to 30 minutes more to just, everybody want to take a short break, maybe 5 minutes and stretch and come back, and then we'll talk about comments next up. Is that
I personally
yes?
want a break.
Sounds like
Okay.
it's to the motion.
Let's take 5 minutes.
Okay.
And we'll come back and try and answer some questions and put together a plan for moving forward. Thank you. Lance, when you're ready, go ahead and bring up the next slide.
Okay.
So welcome back, everybody. Just wanted to let you know that as we find resources that we believe are relevant, and or as people submit those, we really want to make them available to everybody. And so these are stuff that I've asked to be included on the website for references. The three of them I mentioned previously, but there's also been and will be continued conversation on ERVs, HRVs, and minimum ventilation. And I just wanted to include this ventilation study. This is probably one of the best studies I've seen in a while related specific to that. And this was done by Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I believe Washington State University worked on that. But it's an excellent resource, and if we want to talk about ventilation and how that plays into the house, into the construction of homes, this is a good place to start from and to kind of put us in a more knowledgeable position. So this is the stuff that I've asked to be added. Next slide. And I hope that people were able to kind of jot down some questions or comments. Kind of where we're at this point is, how do we move forward? And I'm not going to cut anybody off, but I want to go to the next slide just to kind of stimulate some conversation. And so right now, for our next meeting we have scheduled in April, I don't have a presentation put together. We've kind of reviewed the 21 and 24, more on the residential than the commercial. I wasn't sure how much of the commercial was being changed and stuff, and it is kind of goes a different pathway. I can talk briefly about that. But there are things that continue to come up as part of our code discussions. I don't know that we need to do anything with ceiling insulation. We've done some cost modeling on that. Always open to new information, but if they're going to put that back to where it is currently in the 24, that may not be what I consider a hot topic. But we continue to have a lot of questions around EV charging and requiring that in homes. And I think I'm speaking for myself. I'm not very familiar with this particular topic, and I'm wondering if there's somebody in our group or that somebody in our group that knows somebody that could give us some more information on EV charging and what our infrastructure potential looks like. Is this an unnecessary burden on local utilities, or not? I shouldn't say unnecessary. Is it a burden? Is it feasible? I would like to see, and not just for my information, but for the building code board and the stakeholders, I think we'd like to see a bigger picture conversation around this, and knowing that it's going to come up as part of this process. And so right now, I don't have an expert or a group of experts to point to on this particular subject. And so I'm kind of open for suggestions there as part of the comments. And then the last line there on this page is, we have traditionally always adopted the residential and commercial codes together. And is there, is there potential? Is there any want? I mean, if we're not able to move on the 2021 residential, can we move on the commercial side of it? And again, I'm just asking this question to kind of stimulate some conversation, because there is a lot of value there, but we have kind of a different group of stakeholders in the residential and the commercial. And, is there a way to potentially move one side of it? I don't know. I'm just, these are things that, in looking at discussion topics that I've jotted down for examples. And so with that, I'd like to turn it back to the group. And, this really is the time that we need to, talk about, how do we move forward? What do we need another meeting? Do we want to continue these discussions within our group? And, most importantly, as these things work their way through the building code board, do we have people that are ready to, address these as they move through that process? So I will turn it over to our group.
Hey, Jerry, this is Charlie. And I thought I would just jump in first here because I was actually one of the people that was on the IECC consensus committee that developed the new 2024 code. And I can tell you that there was a lot of people on there that were a lot smarter than I was and had a lot of data that was very beneficial. But it was also a process that I felt like some industry really pushed hard with, because they did hire a lot of people that were smarter and had all these numbers, but at the same time, it was going to be hard to implement and to get states to adopt it. So in some regards, I applaud. I totally agree with what the board decided to do in regards to moving 6 of the sections that we worked hard on into the appendix. But at the same time, I do think it was probably the right decision in that we got to crawl before we walk here. And Idaho is, I don't mean to sound derogatory, but it's not a top priority like in some other states. Other states are willing and ready to adopt vehicle charging infrastructure. And I guess we're getting there, but to make it mandatory, I would say I'm in support that they don't make it mandatory. I don't think it's too burdensome to come back afterwards and add that. And you mentioned that you needed a professional maybe to weigh in on the EV charging thing. I've done a little research, and it's about $500, to get that ready. So that is a pretty significant. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an average for a 120 versus 220 system. It's going to be a little more for one. The equipment might be a little more for one than the other, but I'd say an average of $500. And I also know that during testimony yesterday in some of the hearings on the electric bill, that was also a number that was brought up. So, that's maybe something that gives us a little more information that we want to pursue that. But I'm in favor of making that an appendix. So I think some of the other items that were put in to the appendix section by the board ruffled a lot of feathers, but I do have to say that I think the board maybe was within the right, because the measures that they felt did not directly affect the building conservation, building energy efficiency. I mean, it's great to have an EV charging station, but what's the number for energy conservation by putting an EV? You couldn't really put a and a number to that. So I kind of
Yeah.
agree with some of that, but
So
you-
I'm assuming, Charlie, that the 120 system is not going to put a significant additional load on the panel. The standard 200 amp panel is appropriate.
I can't speak to that, but I could
Okay.
find that out for you. I do have an electrical contractor that does do contract inspections for our city, and he's put these in many homes, and he would be able to give us some information, but I guess I
Charlie?
shouldn't speak to that. I don't know for sure.
Charlie, do you mind, did you plan on attending the building code board meeting?
Well, I'm planning on it. Tell me when it is again.
It's, the first one is April 16th.
9 a.m.
And
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to get too deep into it. They're probably going to do an overview, similar to what we did in January.
I plan on attending them always, but I should be able to.
I was just hoping that somebody, if it comes up as part of that discussion, that somebody could kind of give the board a brief overview of where we're,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, sure.
just be able to speak to it. So
And then you mentioned, where do we move forward from here? I do think the 2024 is definitely more restrictive, but it also offers a few more options in the trade-offs or in the getting credits. So at this point, I think we need to have another meeting, maybe would be my recommendation. I'm the only one that's spoken so far, so take mine for 2 cents, that's worth, but it might be a better idea to look at the 21-24 comparatively and really see which one we would like to push after we do a little more research on
Yeah,
the costs of it.
I talked briefly about it at the last meeting, and the trying to go through the state process. I don't see us being able to make a significant change this year. It's just a time limited thing. And my professional guess would be that we probably look at the 24 instead of spending a couple of years on the 21 and then still ending up behind whether we might want to be a little more forward looking and take into consideration the benefits and changes of the 24. Having said that, we haven't brought the commercial into that particular discussion.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, I would support your recommendation there too, and I don't think it'll be as hard to do that now that the board prohibited some, they through the appeals process, they moved some of the provisions to the appendix that were pretty much hot topics, like making everything electrical ready, solar ready, EV charging ready. Now that those are appendix, I think the 2024 is a doable document. If we make some minor amendments.
on both the commercial and the residential.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for commercial, I think you mentioned, how do we go about making that more effective, I guess. I know that it's a hot topic for some jurisdictions, but I think the commissioning of buildings is required in the code, and for commercial buildings. And
Yes.
I don't think a lot of jurisdictions, I shouldn't speak for others, but I'm pretty confident that they don't require commissioning. I think some of the bigger jurisdictions do.
Yeah.
But I know when people get involved with commissioning, that really does make a big difference in how, energy reduction is accomplished through the commissioning of a building, because it has to be designed in regards with, or with the commissioning in mind. So they know they got to come back and do some testing and make sure it meets the standard that they designed it to. So that would be something we could do more training on, I think. And
Yeah, I put together I do have an HVAC and lighting commissioning presentation I put together recently for the integrated design lab, and so that is available if people are interested. Let me know. But that is currently in the 2018 code, and so yeah, I agree, Charlie. We just need to help people understand. It sounds extremely complex, but it is something that has to be done. So, anybody else? I don't mean to cut you off, Charlie. Were you done?
yeah, that's my comments.
I'm sorry. Anybody else?
Yeah, you got a question from Kevin, Jerry.
Kevin?
Yeah. I'm not responding directly to Charlie, so if somebody wanted to follow him up more directly, I can hold off. I just had more to add.
If we can, real quick, Kevin,
Mhm.
Jerry, I don't know if you see in the comments, but Jerica, as you and Charlie were talking, shared a snapshot of a PNNL report for climate zones 4 and 5. I don't know if that's anything that Jerica wanted to further expand on, but.
No, I was just showing some of the costs that PNNL had looked at for just new construction costs for EV readiness, because I thought we were kind of talking about EV readiness versus a retrofit cost. So those are, I can share that report with you too, Jerry, when I send that. They actually were working on the stretch code for the state of Illinois, and they were just going to adopt the 2024 before the provisions that were appealed out. So there's some things that aren't quite applicable anymore, but some of those cost references are good if we needed them, but they're not in the code anymore. So maybe it's a moot point. I was going to offer one follow-up to Charlie about the 2024 commercial code. I do think that there are some pretty new topics that are going to require a lot of training and things like that. So it's not quite, I don't think it's quite as easy and simple as the 2021. I'm thinking specifically about some of the thermal bridging requirements. There is a new total system performance ratio for mechanical systems that was introduced. And the additional efficiency credits are, that section is pretty intense
Okay.
as far as the options there. So a couple like key hot items, I think, to look at on the commercial side for the 2024.
So Jerica, if you or anyone else in our group is aware of training on some of this and we can share that, that would be great, because this is not this is just not an area that I'm super familiar with. We had an architect do a really good presentation on bridging and continuous insulation, air sealing and stuff, but he's left us and I don't have access to that type of training, but it would be very helpful. So.
PNNL has done a lot of training on those three topics in particular, especially as they as we've worked through the code development process. But it's certainly at the top of my absolute need to develop in the next 3 to 6 months training for the code council, and to be able to make sure that that's available to the public as well.
And then before we move too far off of that particular topic, Charlie, Tess, is there interest in providing this material on a broader scale? Can we make this a training topic just so that we can have this conversation, you know, in a jurisdiction or in an area to let people, you know, kind of try to bring other people up to speed on what these changes are. Is that something of interest to the group? Is that something we should try to do, expand a little bit?
Jerry, are you speaking directly regarding the new commercial and residential requirements, or just the 24 code in general?
So I've done two PowerPoints. We did the 2021, both residential and commercial. I'd have to go back and, you know, do a little bit of editing on those, but is this something that is of interest on a larger scale? You know, should we be trying to help people understand what these new codes are as we're working through the potential adoption?
Definitely education on the new requirements is needed, I think. I participated more in the residential hearings. I was on that subcommittee. I wasn't in the commercial one, so I'm unfamiliar with a lot of the commercial ones also.
Yeah.
So I'm personally interested in training on the new requirements if to the 2024, if that's what we're looking at.
So just to kind of clarify what I'm thinking about, typically we wait until we've adopted the code before we do code update trainings, but is there merit to, you know, making people aware of the changes as we're going through the adoption process to try to, you know, get better input or more people interested? That was my question.
Well, in connection to that, Jerry, just real quick, Kevin just posted in the chat a link to a training that maybe kind of speaks to that. So I don't know if that's something we'd want to check out.
Okay. All right.
Just something to keep in mind. Kevin, is there anything you wanted to add on that? Was that what you just posted, or?
Yeah, when I originally raised my hand, I was gonna say some similar things to what Jerica said, providing some coverage about, you know, what's the commercial side of this. I provided the residential information, one, because it's easier to do that, especially to put it on one sheet of paper. Commercial, it's not really possible. And number two, because the commercial story is pretty easy to tell. The arrow kind of only goes one direction. It's a pretty clean efficiency increases and by a pretty steady amount over the past few code cycles. Not by the same amount each time, but the story is pretty similar. Whereas for the residential code, the amount of savings varies pretty starkly from IECC version to IECC version over the past decade. So so I wanted to provide that background, but Jerica did it already. You know, if the question for folks is 2024 IECC a good code on the commercial side that's going to, you know, save energy and, you know, act as goods consumer protection, that answer is yes. So that's the commercial aspect of what I wanted to mention. Going back to residential, I wanted to, amidst all this good conversation about the 2024 and the 2021 and what's the next best code for Idaho to look to, I did not want for it to get lost, and Jerica alluded to this earlier. The single best energy savings opportunity we have is to simply remove the weakening amendments that are in Idaho's residential code at the moment. Doing so, and that's, I think, even after the ZBR related changes that remove some of those amendments. I'm not an expert on that process. So but my understanding is some of that came out, but all the envelope changes and envelope amendments and things that remain, I don't have the math done on it exactly, but I think that would provide more savings than jumping to 2021 or even 2024 to simply make up what DOE measures to be an 18.4% efficiency difference between the 2018 IECC as written as published by ICC and Idaho's current code, or at least their code before the ZBR changes. So I didn't want to lose sight of the fact that, yes, it's worthwhile and great to be thinking about 2021 and 2024, but don't lose sight of making sure that we're looking at those weakening amendments, and especially the envelope amendments, because that's where the best, highest, most cost-effective savings are available to us at the moment.
Yeah, just Kevin, just so other people are familiar with the difficulty, we're quite rural. Most of Idaho is quite rural, and the challenge in the blower door testing really comes down to having people available to do it. And then, what probably the one thing that we weren't able to fully answer was, what happens if it fails? What if we test a house and it fails? We do that at the final stage, right before the cleaners come in. We can't take the house apart, and if we're leaking around electrical, do we have to get the electrician back in to do it? And so there are logistic pieces of that. It's not just an across the board unwillingness. It really came down to, how do we do it? And so, that was, I think everybody understands the value, at least everybody in our working group understands the value. It's just, how do we get it done?
Yeah, no, no doubt on all of that. And I don't mean to allude that it's an easy thing to change and an easy switch to flip. I just wanted to bring some numbers to it. P&L measured, like I said, 18.4% difference between Idaho's recent code and the 2018 IECC, whereas for climate zone 5 and 6, we're talking about in Idaho, we're only talking about between like a 4 to 8% difference from the 2018 to the 2021. And then 2024 is not yet fully baked, but we're talking about a 10 to 20% difference prescriptive path, depending if we're talking about climate zone 5 or 6. So those are just some numbers that are available from P&L documentation that's out there. Yeah.
And you can share that, or you have shared that with us.
Yeah, I can put it in the chat where each of those numbers come from. Yeah, and just worth highlighting that it's not just the blower door. We talked about ceiling insulation earlier, but window U factors, even climate zone 6 wall insulation is a little behind for 2018. So there are opportunities in a couple of places. I think that you all are very well aware of this, but I didn't want that all to get lost as we're looking at the new shiny document that's, well, it's not quite published yet, but just wanted to provide some numbers to the conversation. I'll throw them in the chat.
And hey, Jerry, I have a question for you on air leakage. I know that we can't solve our rural problem and not having enough, third parties or anybody else to perform these tests. But so the 2021 introduces an exception to air leakage that allows you to use CFM per 100 square feet instead of air changes per hour for those houses that are smaller in volume, like 1,500 square feet. Would using that metric help some of the homes that you're seeing fail pass? I mean, is there any value to that?
I think it all helps, and Dave can comment on this if he wants. Dave and I were actually, we get a lot of kickback on, for and they published some numbers about every time we raise the price by $500, it puts X amount of people out of the market. I think right now interest rates are probably doing more damage than energy code requirements. But we looked at a tiered system trying to figure out, was there a way to address the starter home market? Can we make doing starter homes easier or less expensive? And we really just didn't get going with that conversation. And then looking at, real data, we don't build a lot of starter homes. The average home sizes just keep going up and the average prices keep going up. And so it would be, for me in this area, it would be a challenge to find homes that were that small without looking at the multifamily. Dave, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I can chime in definitely on the comparison between ACH 50 and the comparison with cubic or your square footage. So it's going to be
Yeah.
a win-lose situation. Yes, it's gonna make it easier for the smaller homes to comply, but it's also going to be much more difficult for the larger homes to comply. So it's kind of a win-lose situation. If we're solely looking at it to, benefit entry-level housing, then yes, that's definitely an attractive avenue. But that's why we push, there's a lot of talk and chatter about moving over to the, using the square footage calculation, is because it does make it much easier for the smaller homes to comply. But
And
really,
the code only allows you to use that if your house is smaller than 1,500 square feet. So your larger homes would still have to use ACH.
yeah, and it's that will help them. But we do have, the homes that are complying and doing very well, even that they are smaller at this point. So there a little bit more attention needs to be made. But going back to original comments of, if Idaho adopted the 18 as written or this or that, yes, I can see that we can see great gains there. But it comes back to one thing: after being in hundreds of different jurisdictions across the country, it literally just it comes down to the level of enforcement is what it does come down to. I've seen jurisdictions across this country that are really good at enforcing their energy codes and in turn have very well performing homes. And I've been in other adoptions where the energy code's the redheaded stepchild, and that reflects in what we see in the field. So, overall, it's a great discussion we're having today. Education's key. Typically when jurisdictions don't, enforce well is because they don't understand well. But I do like the idea is if if things look better in the 2024, maybe we should focus more on that, look at that. Maybe we should look at this option of, the square footage, versus ACH calculations. There's a lot of discussion that can be done here. We just, in my mind, I just always have to, remember or keep in front of me what the political atmosphere is in Idaho, and how, we can best achieve energy compliance, keeping that at the forefront.
Hey, Jerry, real quick before we move on, we do have a question or a comment here for Facundo.
Hey, Jerry, Facundo here. I just had a comment and a question. So thinking of what you're saying about the blower door test, what do you do if it fails? I feel like if I'm walking towards or walking around a new build and I see a problem, then we point it out and the builder would fix it, right? Like, I think it will be no different than that process for most things. The people move in, they found a problem, the builder would fix it, and then how they fix it, that's kind of the same question as in any other situation, an electrical problem, plumbing problem, it will be just another problem. Maybe you probably know more about this, but the other question that I have is, has there been are there any programs trying to spread the education or certification of people to be able to do this blower door test? Other programs are trying to help local companies in different areas of the state have access to the equipment. I mean, is anything being done to be able to solve the problem of there not being enough people willing to do the test in Idaho?
Yeah,
I could jump
I'm
in
gonna
on this one
address-
for you, Jerry.
yeah, I just wanted to throw a shameless plug in for my training, Dave. I do provide training around the state for free on air sealing. We've been doing it for years. Dave will speak to equipment and some of our past efforts to secure and distribute that.
So I want to say, and Jerry, correct me, it's probably been 8 years ago. We were looking at the 2012 or the 2015 code when the big discussion came up about air change per hour and blower door testing, and it was quickly realized a lack of. I believe at the time we only had 5 individuals in the state of Idaho that were certified to do blower door testing. Myself and working with Idaho, and actually South Face provided us with most of the curriculum. We actually developed DET training, or duct envelope tightness certification training, in the state of Idaho that we've been offering now. It's been close to 6 years, maybe longer. I do offer those training courses, every quarter. At this time, with the, and it's been very noticeable with the talk right now, removing the blower door requirements, it's going to happen through ZBR. The attendance or the interest in the training has gone to almost zero. The last 2 quarters, we've actually canceled the DET trainings because of lack of attendance. As far as equipment, there was a very strong push. There was a lot of funding provided to us through NEA we were able to purchase equipment for jurisdictions to help them, go out and do some field verifying or checking their. I believe most of the Idaho chapters in Idaho received equipment. So there's been a long effort to provide that training and education. And I believe currently, I don't know how many are currently certified, but it's north of 60 people that would be certified across the state of Idaho, and it could be more than 100. So we have plenty of individuals out there, but again, they're very concentrated in our populous areas, the Boise area, Nampa, the Treasure Valley, several in Magic Valley, Wood River area, North Idaho. But in between, it's pretty sparse. Eastern Idaho has quite a few, but you get out in your, rural areas, it's just cost prohibitive to get those testing individuals out there to do that blower door testing. And then yeah, so there's been a lot of work, a lot of effort. I have, it's a full 2-day training course to get certified that we offer for blower door testing.
So I was just looking at my cards, Dave. My first one expired in 2014, so I've had mine for a while.
Yep. Okay. So
we
it has
tried.
been, yeah, it's been a long time. Well, gosh, I guess I'm going on 13 years that I've been doing this. So
Yeah, Russ Goyen started the air balancing clear back in 2006. So we've had the program in place for a long time. I don't want to hold anybody up, and if they have something else going. The meeting was scheduled for an hour and a half, but if you'd like to stay in on the conversation, I would really appreciate it. My big ask today is that, if you have something that you want to talk about or present or something at the next meeting, please let Lance or myself know. We don't want to have a meeting that lasts, a half hour or 20 minutes. But we would like to, address any concerns, and we will have a chance to follow up on the building code board meeting. But what we're looking for is ideas, topics, things that people want to discuss within this stakeholder group. And so we do encourage your participation in that process. I believe that's all I have unless there is more comments or questions.
Just real quick, Jerry, we did just have one more thing posted by Kevin, just kind of breaking down some of the differences between how energy efficient Idaho is. So there's just some links in there just to make sure that everyone captures that. I'll also make sure to capture these notes and try to put it in a format for everyone to be able to see at a later time.
Thank you. And thanks, Kevin. Thanks for your efforts. Appreciate it. So plan is right now I will do a brief, I will address the building code board briefly. They have access to the meetings and all of the information we presented. But I just want to, let them know that we, have what we've been doing, and that we're, available if they have questions on things. I don't really, part of trying to act as a facilitator was to try to be fairly neutral on this. I think, I can make a lot of points, addressing the merits of energy codes in general, but I have to be careful not to take a position, to where we are not able to, address the board in a neutral manner. But that's just me personally. If you have it's something that you feel strongly about, please, try to be available at the building code board meeting as these topics come up. And if there's no further comments, I will see some of you at the building code board meeting, and we have our next meeting for the last Thursday in April, and I will try to be there in person this time. I have not been feeling really well. I just didn't want to risk giving anybody else what I might have. So I appreciate everybody attending today.
Hey, Jerry, just curious, are they going to be asking for our input on what our recommendation is at this next meeting?
I don't believe so at this time, Charlie. The last board meeting, they went through the IRC and the IBC, and I sent my first presentation over to them, but I think they're probably just going to, whether they use our presentation or their own, I think they're probably just going to highlight the significant changes and just put them in front of the board. I don't believe we'll be, taking testimony on specifics at this next meeting, but I that's just my.
Are you presenting significant changes from the 2024?
Not, I will make today's presentation available after we edit it. I don't know if they'll use it. The feeling that the board at the last meeting was that they wanted to, that their obligation was to look at the 21.
Okay.
Jerry, one other thing I just wanted to mention real quick that Jerica did put in the chat was that she mentioned that that there's an upcoming National Energy Codes Conference being held in Sacramento in May. Just so that that's something that people are aware of. That might be something that maybe we want to take a look at later.
Yeah, I believe the intent was for Dave to go, and if for some reason he can't make it, I volunteered. So hopefully we can have somebody at that.
I'll be there, and I know Kevin will be there. And Tess will be there.
And I am waiting for approval to be there.
Is there anything else, Jerry, that we would like to cover?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Well, I'll send out a follow-up email once we get closer, Jerry, to the entire group, letting them know about the Idaho Building Code Board meeting in April. I'll probably just send either the Friday before or the Monday before. So that people can be aware of that, and then we can continue to move forward.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks, Lance. Thanks, everybody, for attending today.
You bet. Thanks, Jerry.
I'll share that PowerPoint, probably not today, but tomorrow, for you all to be able to have access to.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Lance.